Hey, it's Steve. Welcome back to Clear Direct. This is my Kobe Bryant tribute episode where I'm going to talk about what Kobe meant to me, and then I'm going to talk about 3 aviation related items. I'm not going to talk about what I think happened in the crash. There's plenty of other pilots doing that, conjecturing. I'm the chief of safety at a fighter wing and I've done multiple investigations, and I personally think it's smart to keep an open mind. That said, I'm going to go into 3 things that it kind of makes me think about when it comes to aviation and safety. So man, Kobe's gone. It hasn't even been a week. I was down in Mexico with my 13-year-old basketball playing daughter when I got the notification on my phone. We flew back that afternoon and just been grieving. And it's kind of surprising me how much it's affecting me, and quite honestly, a lot of people. And it just shows you how much people respected him and loved him. So this is just my process working through it. And so I wanted to start off with who he was to me. Why I'm a fan is, well, besides the obvious, I grew up in Southern California. In fact, about 6 to 9 miles away from where his helicopter went down in Calabasas. My town was Agora Hills. And like I mentioned, I'm a dad. I've got a dad to multiple girls. My eldest is 13. She plays basketball. I've always respected his intellect. You know, his breadth as well. I mean, he was laser focused on basketball. Once he got out, I was watching the first game back last night against the Portland Trail Blazers. I'm here in Portland, so if any team was gonna beat them last night, I was sad to see them lose, but I guess I'm glad it was the Blazers. But that being said, one of the commentators talked about how he thought he would struggle after basketball, but he really flourished, and because he took that Mamba mentality, that laser focus, and put it into other things. He won an Academy Award. He loved flying. He loved flying in helicopters around LA. He had an intense love for his family. That was no question. He was fallible. You know, he made mistakes, and he made himself better and learned from those mistakes, which I think is part of that Mamba mentality. And lastly, I've hit on it already, his work ethic and mostly his passion. I kind of resonate with those 2 things, and why I became a fighter pilot. I was so focused and I was so passionate about flying and flying fighters that it's a shame. So anyway, that's a little bit about why I'm grieving. Now onto the aviation related topics. The first one was this just amazing tribute that Stephen Colbert gave to Kobe on The Late Show. And for those of you who don't know, Stephen Colbert's father and 2 brothers died in a plane crash in heavy fog when Stephen Colbert was 10. And there was a flight data recorder, voice cockpit recorder, that was able to solve the mystery of what caused that aircraft to crash. And there were some distractions, so that, and I'm sure other mishaps, led to a sterile cockpit rule, where Stephen Colbert talked about that, and his focus was on the good that came out of that tragedy. Now I understand the constraints in non-commercial aircraft, especially helicopters, weight constraints, but as technology progresses and recorders get smaller and smaller, I think that's a very salient point.
Why compound their misery with mystery about what happened to their loved ones? It's better to know than not to know, because if we know, we could possibly stop this from happening to someone else in the future.
So good on Stephen Colbert for that. It was nice to see. Number 2, I'm going to talk a little bit about the FAA certification process. I'm going to get a little technical here, but what I'm talking about is when a new widget comes on the open market, let's say autopilot, as a commercial off-the-shelf autopilot. Well, you can put it in almost any experimental aircraft, but not a certified aircraft. I own a 1958 J35 Bonanza and V-tail Bonanza, and I've got my eye on an autopilot, a Garmin autopilot, digital autopilot, that I would argue would make my aircraft safer. But there's a risk. But if it's not fully certified or fully tested, that something could go wrong. Well, I also would argue that they've tested it in the V35 Bonanza, the S35 Bonanza. And so in the models, while there are differences, there needs to be some model applicability there. So if something is certified and for one model, yeah, if it's not a great enough difference between those model of aircraft, then it can go into that other model of aircraft. Now, if there is added risk there, then don't let me use my aircraft for commercial purposes or even utility purposes. Limit its purposes and let me decide on whether I want to take that risk, because in my opinion, the upside vastly outweighs the downside safety-wise. So FAA certification takes years, takes a lot of money. So if the FAA can't devote more resources on it, take a look at model applicability and get things to the market quicker. Why does this come to mind with this mishap? Could have been that there was a lack of a terrain alert warning system, a TAWS. That would be a shame if that existed for another helicopter, but wasn't certified on the Sikorsky S-76. So again, I'm not conjecturing here, but that's one thing that I think the FAA needs to take a look at from a safety perspective and say if something's benefits outweigh the drawbacks, let's give it the fast pass. Don't cut corners, but let's expedite this to market. Okay. Now the last thing is, but because I'm a safety nerd and it's, you know, I'm an aviation safety professional as well as a fighter pilot and airline pilot, human factors will undoubtedly be somehow involved in this mishap. Not necessarily the pilots. Could have been a mechanics or FAA, probably not in this case. He was self-navigating on special VFR, or maybe an engineer failed to design a product effectively. So I wanted to take a quick second to talk about risk management and really personal risk assessment. I hope that when we each are planning or pre-flighting or just thinking about our flight, we're taking a look inward and doing some risk assessment on ourselves. How am I feeling? How are the environment? How's the aircraft today? And if something is spiking the radar, make a mitigation adjustment to lower that risk. It's not just finished in pre-flight or on takeoff. You have to constantly be aware and filling that SA bucket, situational awareness bucket of conditions and that are changing around you, and maybe making some adjustments on the fly. So whenever I hear special VFR, hair stand up on the back of my neck, because I go, okay, well, it's there for a reason. It can be safely done, but hopefully everybody, when you hear that, you go, okay, time to risk assess and maybe make a mitigation decision to increase safety in that instance. So that's it. I hope it wasn't too preachy. The last thing I'll say is, let's try to take Mamba mentality into the cockpit and try to be the best pilots we can. And while we're at it, let's try to be the best humans we can, especially to each other. So that's it, other than to say, I'm really gonna miss you, Kobe.
You have to dance beautifully in the box that you are comfortable dancing in. My box was to be extremely ambitious within the sport of basketball. Your box is different than mine. Everybody has their own. It's your job to try to perfect it and make it as beautiful of a canvas as you can make it. And if you have done that, then you have lived a successful life. You have lived with Mamba mentality.